The gameplay of the Star Fox games are based around the vehicles that you use and the context that they're in. Star Fox 64 has the Arwing and linear levels, the Arwing and all range mode sections, the Landmaster, and that stupid submarine. Regardless of what part of the game you're in, you know exactly what the next few minutes of gameplay will look like and how it controls, all because of the vehicle in the center of your screen. When Namco created Star Fox Assault, they decided to first, remove what should have never been there in the first place, and second, make levels have a more dynamic structure. Just because you're in an Arwing right now, doesn't mean you'll need to be it in the next second, or they even needed it in the first place. So while on the surface level, all on-foot missions have the same objective and gameplay loop, they each offer unique environments and vehicles that fundamentally change how you approach them. In one mission, the large landscapes with tough enemies will be best traversed in the tank-like Landmaster. In another, you'll want to use the large range of weapons you have access to take out the enemies in fun and creative ways. And in a third, you'll want the fast movements of the Arwing to travel quickly. All on-foot missions are essentially just playgrounds, ones where you'll have multiple choices to tackle your objective, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. Peppy, the older and wiser mentor of the team, acknowledges this and communicates it to the player.
Assess the conditions and use the Landmaster or Arwing.
In hindsight though, I don't think this playground type of gameplay worked out as well as I just made it sound like. Most missions, despite being on foot, very much do have an objectively correct method and gameplay style to get through them. Like yeah, I guess I could just ignore the strong and fast Landmaster they give me in this mission. But the enemies all have a lot of health, and the game gives us no other weapons, so we're stuck just waiting 3 seconds to get the strongest blaster shot just to kill one enemy over and over again. And these snail things are practically unkillable without the Landmaster. Not using the Landmaster they give you effectively makes it a significantly worse mission because it was designed around actually using it. Looking at all the missions in the game, only 2 of them really give us the full freedom I was talking about earlier. That doesn't mean that the missions without the playground levels of freedom are necessarily bad. Across every mission, a spotlight is placed on all playstyles and vehicles at least once, but it's disappointing to see the feature that this game pioneered not being fully utilized. Wouldn't it be cool if every mission had players making decisions about how they tackle their objective, each with different environments that promote certain vehicles while not explicitly invalidating others? It would be, but the decision the developers did make gives each level their own sort of personality. To name 2 examples, the mission with the Blizzard is practically defined by using the Landmaster, and a rather tough mission on your own homeworld is also defined by its lack of vehicles. And that's not for no reason either. The alien enemy force, called the Aperoids, have developed a new type of unit that messes with the Star Fox team's radar. Alien technology is so powerful that the Great Fox can't send you any vehicles. This is something I love about this game. It initially seems rather arbitrary and random what vehicles you can and can't use for any mission, but there's always a good explanation. In the second mission, you don't have a vehicle because you are physically separated from your Arwing.
It's a trap!
And you don't get one until Fox specifically requests for a Landmaster.
Peppy, send me a Landmaster, will you?
In the Blizzard mission I've mentioned like 4 times now, Fox isn't given an Arwing because the weather isn't flyable.
Oh, we can't fly our Arwings in this weather?
And in the mission where we invade a base, it initially seems super video game-like that these random space criminals conveniently have a runway to fit something the size of an Arwing. The people in the base don't even use the runway themselves, they just use transfer devices to reach their base. It really doesn't make any sense for this to even exist. However, you'll realize pretty quickly that their boss is Wolf.
Boss, you're here!
It's kinda hard to miss. Then it'll eventually hit you that these runways I was just making fun of are actually for Wolf and his team. They aren't just some convenient gameplay feature, they have a real reason to exist. In fact, even the gameplay feature where vehicles have fixed spawns, a common staple across many different games because of how easy it is to program and test, has a canon explanation. Fox frustratingly mentions this gameplay mechanic when he requests for a Landmaster and it appears rather far from him.
Great. Good to see the transmission system's targeting is as sterling as ever.
It's simply explained as the Great Fox's hardware missing its target by some slight amount. Still impressive though when considering that it was done from incredibly far away. Obviously it's still a video game, so some flaws inevitably exist. Like the Arwing parked just outside the base vanishing immediately after the cutscene ends. The Great Fox not being able to get a Landmaster closer to Fox in a wide open area, but being perfectly capable of spawning an Arwing inside of an enemy base within an asteroid belt that's also flooded with enemy aircraft is crazy. Fox also just magically appears on an island with no form of transportation to be found. And when inside of enemy territory of unknown coordinates, the game can infinitely spawn in Landmasters and Arwings, even though the characters mention their caution around their lack of resources. Now everything I've mentioned is all within the constraints of the vanilla game. So what happens when we break that? Like yeah, we can't get a Landmaster from the Great Fox because our radar is jammed or whatever, but my hacks don't care about that. With no limits, why not do whatever we want?
I sent you a Landmaster, Fox.
What's that, Peppy? You said you spawned in one?
We can't fly our Arwings in this
I'm sorry, did you say something, Slippy? I thought you were the smart one, I can fly just fine.
Head out for the Arwing, Fox.
Is your age degrading your eyesight? I'm already in one. Alright, now this part of the game is really nice because it's the only time where your allies help you instead of the other way around. The blizzard is gone and Arwing travel is now possible. And now, the best pilot on the team is coming to save us. But I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you over my staircase of Landmasters. You have to fly better than that, Mr. Ace Pilot. You get the point. I can make fun of the game for hours if I wanted to, but I think it'll be more interesting to talk about how the game can handle situations the developers never intended. For starters, how does the game handle vehicles being in levels where they shouldn't exist? Well, in Versus mode, that just isn't a problem. It loads all vehicles and everything about them regardless of what you choose in the menus, even in maps where their inclusion would make literally no sense. In single player, however, the game isn't so lenient. It only loads what it needs. Spawning a Landmaster where it's never present leads to it just being invisible. The sound effects, weapon projectile information, and even collision are loaded, which is strange to think about since players would never know that. The only exception being in Mission 7, where the models and textures are present for seemingly no real reason. I can only speculate it was used in an earlier version of the game, especially considering that there is an almost unused respawn point conveniently next to a road in the same mission, but I can't confirm anything beyond speculation. The same story follows for the Wolfen and Arwing. In missions where they aren't present, the models and textures aren't loaded. With the Wolfen, it's actually fully loaded in Mission 5, which makes sense when you think about it. I mean, all the parts are just shown to you in space, but I never thought it was the entire thing. Because your teammates are in the Arwing in every mission, it's always loaded and we can't demonstrate it being invisible. We can, however, demonstrate the wings being invisible. So apparently the wings used for the on-rails Arwing and the all-range mode Arwing aren't the same. Star Fox 64 shows the difference between the two wings in real time by simply rotating them a certain amount. Now the developers for Assault could have also just done that. I mean, the wings flaps are literally the same and rotated a certain amount, but they didn't. They instead decided to make separate models for each wing type. So depending on the mission of the game you're in, you can only see one wing model loaded, with the only exception being Mission 10, as it's the only time in the whole game where both wing models are needed. Very luckily for us, the logic for the functionality and spawning of all vehicles in the game are always loaded, even on that health and safety screen I've never read. What this means is that we can spawn in the all-range vehicles in the on-rails levels. Well, okay, you didn't think it would be that easy, did you? As for why it crashed, the game is just trying to check the boundaries of the level. So the places on the map where you U-turn automatically in the Arwing, or where the Landmaster refuses to go any farther, are just numbers saved somewhere. In on-rails levels, these numbers just don't exist, hence the crash. The only exception is the Aproid Queen fight, because the boundaries from the previous phase still exist. With hacks we can fake this information to prevent the crash, but we run into another problem. We can't exit the vehicle we spawned in as. Now for those who watched one of my earlier videos, you would know that you can just change a flag to get out. However, the on-rails Arwing will just stay locked. It has no functionality to let us leave our vehicle. Using another Gecko code I made, we can fix that problem and exit flawlessly. Although the camera does freak out, and I'm not sure if that's a result of my code or how the game handles this specific vehicle exit. Using this code, we can now enter the invisible Landmaster and fight Pigma with it. Okay, never mind, the shots are doing practically nothing, and the sound effects and some collisions don't work like they normally would. It turns out the on-rails levels are a bit smarter in what they load. Well, at least for the Landmaster. Despite the fact that we can see the Landmaster projectile when charging it, the actual object that's shot out doesn't exist. It isn't even because the particle effects or the model or whatever doesn't exist. It's because information for how the projectile works doesn't exist. Information like the total travel distance, speed, damage, and so on. Every time a level is loaded, all this information is set to 0, which effectively deletes it, and new information is loaded as the game loads. For all on-rails levels, so missions 1, 5, and 10, the Landmaster projectile information is never loaded. So when we shoot a projectile, it is made with a lifespan of 0 seconds, a maximum travel distance of 0 units, and 0 speed. This means that the projectile is created in one moment, then the game realizes its time to live expired and is deleted the next moment. If we hack the game to prevent it from unloading the projectile information, then the shots work exactly as you would expect. So now we can fight Pigma with a Landmaster. The Arwing and Wolfen projectiles are always loaded, so this quirk can only really be seen with the Landmaster. Now, like I said before, the code and functionality for the vehicles are loaded once the game boots up. That holds true even for the on-rails Arwing, so we can spawn it in all range mode levels.
Now it gets...
No, you actually fell for that again. While the all range mode vehicles need to know the level boundaries, the on-rails Arwing needs 3 different numbers. I honestly have no clue what these 3 numbers do, they seem completely arbitrary to me. Luckily, in a similar fashion to the all range mode vehicles, we can just fake this information and bypass the crash entirely. Doing so, we can very easily see how much this vehicle was never meant to not be controlled by someone. The vehicle doesn't react to the world, have any collision, or even do anything. It's completely frozen, but can still be entered like any other vehicle. You might think this is cut content of some kind because this is something we can't see in vanilla gameplay, but I doubt it. When testing a game, you're going to have circumstances that don't exist in the actual game to make testing things a lot easier. So it's very possible they had a test level with all vehicles in it, and they enter whatever they need to test what they want to test. It's also possible that the on-rails Arwing shares code with other vehicles because they're both player controlled, and being able to press Z to ride is a consequence of that. But at the end of the day, that makes my life much easier, so I'm not going to complain about it. Okay, now where on Katina am I? Get it? I didn't say where on Earth am I because this isn't Earth. Well, the position where you see the on-rails Arwing, and even the teammate Arwing in the wing riding sections, doesn't work how you think it would. So unlike the all-range vehicles that move relative to the direction they're facing, aka moving forward moves you wherever the front of your vehicle points, these Arwings are glued to a fixed path and will always follow it no matter what you do or direction they face. In fact, the teammate Arwing doesn't even seem to move in ways that make sense. Even with hacks to mess with the position of the Arwing, it will go back to the exact same path like nothing happened. So every frame, or every time the game screen updates in this case, the Arwings are teleported to a specific location along the fixed path. The path is hard-coded, and nothing we can do can change it or get us off of it. You can even see the extremes of this in the vanilla game. When an on-rails Arwing is first created, it actually spawns in at the origin of the map, which is usually really far from where the hard-coded path starts. By boosting just as the mission starts, you'll see that the boost trail is abnormally long and pointing to a previous position that shouldn't make any sense. Once we consider that it came from the origin of the map, and not an inch behind where it normally is, it'll make sense. The only control we do have over the hard-coded path is the speed at which we go through it, such as with boosting and braking. We can also control small movements with the analog stick, although there isn't too much interesting about that, we just move within a small square. The point of explaining how movement works in the on-rails Arwing is because I need to emphasize the fact that when someone is riding in it, it has to go to the hard-coded path. Since none exist in levels where the Arwing isn't used, for obvious reasons, it instead goes to the last known position along a hard-coded path. In the case that we were at the start of the first mission, we'll end up here in Katina. If we were here in the upward homeworld, we ended up upside down in Corneria and can even go underwater. While cool, there isn't much we can do with this. I suppose we can see the game instantly teleport you to the level boundaries when exiting, although with a camera like this it's hard to fully make out the distance traveled. In addition to our last location being saved, the size of the box we can move around in is also saved. So if we were last at the Oinkini fight, you can see that we have more movement compared to if we were previously at the Pigma fight. Honestly, I never even considered the fact that the size changed throughout the game, although in hindsight, especially in moments like this, it does make a lot of sense. If we just booted up the game and never played a level with the on-rails Arwing, the game resorts to default values. So coordinates 0, 0, 0, aka the center of the map, and a box size of 0 that we can move around in. And the game has a bit of a hard time handling this at times. If we want to be consistently in bounds when using this Arwing, it's really simple actually. All boss fights take place around the 0, 0, 0 coordinates. It looks like we're constantly moving forward, especially with backgrounds like this, but in reality we aren't actually moving. The game is just pulling trickery to make it seem like we're moving, so by exiting on any of the bosses, we'll be placed somewhere where we can actually use the vehicle to help in the levels. But in reality, you'll be facing towards nothing important and be half out of bounds. In fact, we can barely even use the Arwing. The game immediately acts like we completed our objective and goes on to the next one. In longer missions, we just speed through the whole thing. Despite doing nothing, every cutscene and mission phase is triggered until we reach the results screen. I promise this isn't video editing, this is actual game footage. The reason for this is quite simple. Whenever we reach the end of a hard-coded path, we go on to the next mission phase. This is true even for the boss fights, although since we aren't actually moving, you'll never see it in normal gameplay. Hacking our speed to be higher allows me to demonstrate that there is a very small path that ends just behind the bosses. Then we go on to the next mission phase, which is almost always the results screen. When it comes to levels that have no path, I assume the game just assumes we're at the end of it and goes on to the next mission phase, assuming we actually did the objective. Which should explain why this is happening. The only thing truly stopping us is when the game teleports us somewhere else. If we hack the game to prevent this kind of behavior, we can stay in it infinitely. But because we aren't actually moving, you aren't going to get much mileage out of it. Although this does allow us to see how death is handled, and it's the exact same. It happens faster than it should normally, but that's pretty insignificant in the grand scheme of things. If we also hack the game to prevent our death from being registered properly, which may seem weird but we can do that, you'll notice we're stuck. And our allies won't stop screaming out Fox's name. And yes, I did change to the Japanese version just to showcase much better screams. But if you pay attention carefully, you'll see that the enemies are still attacking where we last were. That's because despite the fact that the Arwing blew up and is now gone, it still exists as far as the game is concerned. The game only considers it truly gone when we respawn, which isn't happening because I removed that functionality. Remember me showcasing a code to exit the on-res Arwing? Well, we can use that here and play the game in this strange state. I say it's strange because our health is 0, which leads to weird effects. I won't be talking about all of them, but the important two are that you can no longer pick up items and the radar stops working properly. Using the on-res Arwing in versus mode leads to the exact same results from the single player. The only difference is seen when you need to go to a different mission phase or you need to respawn. The game puts you in a state where you can't take damage or pause. This is something that also occurs in versus mode. However, since a win condition for versus mode was never satisfied, because, this isn't supposed to happen, we are now stuck in this state forever and softlocked. The only way to avoid it would be to die on a versus mode win condition, such as your last life. As far as spawning all range vehicles and all range mode levels go, it does what you think it does. Most of these levels already have these vehicles anyway, and even if they don't, you can realistically imagine what it would be like to have them. Don't expect too many interesting edge cases either. Radar jammers and sentry bots are still invulnerable to the Landmaster, despite the fact they shouldn't be able to handle a literal tank shot or its incredible weight in realistic situations. There are some things you wouldn't expect, especially in Mission 3. First of all, the special little animation of the Arwing flying outside the base is something you always have to sit through, no matter where the Arwing is spawned. So if you spawn an Arwing facing a wall, you're just stuck watching it crash over and over again. You can't exit the Arwing or take damage in this state, so you're forced to watch this whole thing. Fortunately, the game will eventually activate a failsafe and free you. From there, you are free to use the Arwing as you would under normal circumstances. That means you need to keep in mind that the flag I mentioned in an earlier video is turned off, so you can't exit the Arwing unless you activate the trigger on the gate. Keep that in mind or you will die. Speaking of which, the game does seem to account for the fact that another Arwing is already there. So instead of placing them inside of each other, it just stacks them. Until the stack gets too large and then they start going inside of each other. There is some funny behavior we can see when entering them in a stack, but otherwise not much happens. In Mission 7, we can move the radar jammers with the Landmaster. It's as simple as barrel rolling into them. With enough time, you could group them all together, but I don't see a practical use for this. In single player, the game also knows what the real vehicle is. So creating another one and destroying it won't cause it to respawn as the real one wasn't destroyed. Only once the real one is destroyed will the game react to it. This is also true for when the Landmaster is despawned when entering the Climate Control Center. Something which is very hard to see in the vanilla gameplay but is still there. Only the real Landmaster is despawned while the others remain. On the other hand, versus mode does account for these illegally spawned vehicles. So when it needs to know the total amount of vehicles spawned in, it does take into account the vehicles that spawned illegally, even if they weren't selected in the menus. And if the map's limit is reached, the game won't spawn in any more vehicles. The game will also despawn the vehicles once the time limit is up, just like for the normally spawned vehicles. As for the wing riding parts of the game, they're more or less just all range mode levels except with the restriction that you're stuck riding on a wing. So that's where the name comes from. Anyway, to free myself from the wing, I'll use a code from my first video to exit the Arwing. When I say exit, I do mean it very loosely. As far as the game is concerned, we are inside of this teammate Arwing the same way we are inside of any other vehicle. When entering a vehicle normally, the game updates the vehicle the player is riding, the player inside of the vehicle, and updates the player state, among a lot of other things. The code I'm using to exit the Arwing just changes the player state to that of when you're normally walking around. So the game still thinks we're inside of the vehicle even though it doesn't look like it. The reason I bring all this up is because when entering a vehicle in this weird state I just described, your health is set to 0. This isn't because of how these parts of the game work, it's because of how health works when inside of a vehicle. Normally, when inside of a vehicle, your health is automatically set to whatever the vehicle has saved. I assume this is done so that when the vehicle takes damage, it can update the player health and then the player object can just copy it. The problem is that in this weird state, the game thinks that the vehicle we're entering has our health value, but it obviously doesn't. So our health immediately gets set to 0. You know this happens when the radar breaks. All you have to do to fix it is to take damage while inside of any vehicle and you see the radar is fixed. The HUD element shows the health of the vehicle, so you can't rely on that. If you're wondering why I don't just update my code to fake exit the teammate Arwing, it's because exiting any vehicle in this part of the game crashes it. So we can't do that. Otherwise, these parts of the game act as all range mode levels do, and they follow the same basic rules. The Landmaster does what you think it does, so good luck catching up to Falco, and the Arwing allows us to explore these levels from perspectives previously impossible. And wow, it looks weird from other perspectives. The only really interesting thing about these sections of the game is when you enter an on-rails Arwing. You'll notice that not only are we on the path your teammate takes, but we are also allowed to move around. I talked about this in an earlier segment of the video, but as a recap, when entering an on-rails Arwing, you go to wherever you were last in that vehicle. If you were never in it before, you go to the center of the map and can't move. Mysteriously though, when in a ring riding part of the game, none of that matters. In fact, this acts exactly like an on-rails level. I mean, we can barely shoot the enemies, but we can boost, loop, barrel roll, and so on perfectly fine. The speed we go through the path is also affected by our movement. If we spam boost, we'll see that we go through the level faster and the enemies mysteriously don't shoot. I assume they're moving too fast to shoot, but that's only a theory. We can also see General Pepper's attack miss, which looks really funny. One more thing. Remember how I said if we don't play an on-rails level before entering the on-rails Arwing, we're stuck in the middle of the map? Even though wing riding parts of the game bypasses that requirement, we need to enter the Arwing for that to take effect. So just existing in these parts of the game and not entering the on-rails Arwing doesn't satisfy that condition. As an example, entering it right after we're on Falco's wing will cause us to be stuck in the center of the map, unable to move. But if we did enter it at any point during the wing riding parts of the game, then that won't happen. Now time for arguably the most unique levels in the game. As I mentioned before, to exit the on-rails Arwing I'll be using a Gecko code I briefly discussed earlier. For starters, you'll see that you'll be put into an animationless state, and your model for Fox will have a large variety of different looks, including being invisible. I discussed this in one of my earlier videos, but to quickly recap, no animations are loaded. Using certain ones that take control from the player, like taunting or being hit by an attack, will permanently lock your movement. And if no floor collisions exist below y = 0, a failsafe activates and it pretends like a floor exists when one actually doesn't. Walking over any valid floor collision will make you fall to it, and walking off of it teleports you back to y = 0. As innocent as it seems, just exiting the Arwing can begin to cause noticeable problems with the game. In these missions, the Arwing is set on a fixed path, as I've said many times already, but also at a set speed. We can change the speed slightly with boosting and braking, but the base speed is out of our control. And throughout the missions, that base speed value will change, sometimes to go faster and other times slower. When exiting the on-rails Arwing, it'll freeze it in place and practically act like it doesn't exist anymore, in the same fashion we see in the all range mode levels. What this means is that the base speed value doesn't update. So if we exit the Arwing when it's going fast, then the game will think we are going through the level at much higher speeds than we normally can. At the very beginning of the first level we can easily demonstrate this. Even without this side-by-side view you can see the dialogue, which, for the record, is position dependent. Play when it normally shouldn't be playing this fast. The same can be true if we exit it when going slower than normal, but that isn't nearly as exciting. It's also important to note that when entering an on-rails Arwing you just spawned in, the game will know to look at the speed value from the Arwing you're inside, not the one that's frozen in place, so only the most recent on-rails Arwing is used. Because not being in an Arwing still moves us through the path like nothing happened, spawning and entering a new one will teleport you to wherever along the path you would be. So exiting one, Waiting a minute and entering a new one will teleport you to where you need to be on the path given a minute at the speed value in the other Arwing. Although enemies don't seem to know who to target, sometimes they target the original Arwing and other times they don't. I can't explain it, but it's still cool enough to talk about. It's also worth noting that the game does a poor job handling the extra Arwings when in cutscenes. It's possible to see this effect with bombs in the vanilla game, and with particle effects in most cutscenes, but it seems to also hold true for the vehicles. And it looks hilarious just seeing a random box of them in the middle of a cutscene. This works with the all range mode vehicles too, but they aren't rendered during the cutscene, so we can only see their particle effects. Spawning in the Landmaster leads to the effects I described earlier. So a crash because the level boundaries don't exist, no models, no textures, no sound effects, no collision, and no loaded projectiles. As of now, I only have a code to fix the crash and projectiles not loading in. But what's cool is that running someone over with the Landmaster is counted as a projectile. What this means is that, because it technically isn't loaded, it does 0 damage. So running someone over in these missions just leads to this. Awesome. Otherwise, the Landmaster is too slow to do anything interesting with. You can fight bosses with it because they're stationary, but that's kinda it. Spawning in the all range mode Arwing is pretty much what you would expect. Just don't be fooled by its appearance, it has no collision. You can attempt to go through the levels with it, but you'll probably be too slow. What's significantly more interesting is that you can explore the levels freely. Considering you're normally stuck facing a certain direction, you can't look at most of these levels. Like, where does this water go? But now that you're in a flying vehicle with free movement, we can see everything. And the answer is an archway. Now I could go into an entire boundary break episode right now to talk about all the things you can see witness out of bounds, but I really don't want to. It'll take far too long to make, and I'm not exactly one to be too interested in doing that. The most interesting thing I found is that Oinkini in the second phase will fly away at increasing speeds until he's off screen to despawn. In the first phase it just despawns at a set point, but here Oinkini is determined to fly faster and faster until he's off camera. If you're interested in doing your own boundary break fun, I'll provide a code to speed up the Arwing to make things easier. And that concludes the video. Star Fox Assault was one of the first video games I played back before I even went to elementary school. It wasn't my favorite game on the console at the time, but it was definitely up there. And as a kid, the mere thought of doing what I can do now with the game could have only been possible with dreams. I remember wanting the Landmaster inside the Climate Control Center so badly because for one, Rob says you can't.
The Landmaster will not fit inside the center.
And because the AI I didn't fully understand at the time was a bit hard to kill. And now, as an adult, I can confidently say the Landmaster doesn't solve the problem I had as a kid. In fact, practically all the cool things I thought I could do if I just had this one vehicle here turned out to be really boring. Enemies don't just magically take damage to vehicles that weren't intended to exist there in the first place. They aren't going to code different flight physics for a blizzard that no one will see, and there is no way to avoid the trap in Corneria. It turns out that the most interesting thing is defeating the boss of Ficina and the Landmaster. If you don't know, you need to get really high up in the air to get a clear shot at it, and that's pretty hard to do with a tank literally called the Landmaster. It's fully possible with an exploit with barrel rolling and hovering, but good luck, you'll need it. I may no longer be the overly curious and imaginative person I was decades ago, but there might be someone else out there who still is. The codes I used to record this video are in the description of the video in a Google document. Feel free to use them as you please, I even explain them at the bottom of the document, just give credit where appropriate. Anyway, thanks for watching.